Yes, good afternoon. As you can see by the slide, welcome to the webinar on gender-specific approaches, preventative work for girls. We're still waiting. Some people might face some difficulties checking in this WebEx environment. Not the most friendly WebEx of a digital platform, but a very safe one, and that's the reason why we use it. So we're just waiting for some more participants to enter the room, and then we'll start off with our lovely program. Still some people dropping in. I'm going to wait just 1, perhaps 2 minutes, and then we're going to kick off. I think we're going to start off to award the people who are here on time, like our speakers and panelists and my colleague, and 28 other participants. We're expecting some more, but I propose to start with the webinar. I would like to welcome speakers, panelists, and all the participants to what might be one of the last RAN practitioners events of 2023. 6 more months of RAN to come next year. And in these busy times just before Christmas, while all of us are struggling to get to the end, I'm so pleased to invite Dr. Evian Leidig and Associate Professor Nina Keeshage and panelist Amina and Nicole to the webinar. Can you show the next slide, Carlijn? My colleague Carlijn. Welcome, Carlijn. My name is Steven Lenos. I work with the RAN practitioner staff, just like Carlijn, and we're also supporting the RAN Youth and Education Working Group. And in the RAN Youth and Education Working Group, it was mentioned that we should do some more on women and girls. And I'm very pleased we found 4 people who will be guiding us through the topic. Just a very quick look on the program. We will start off with Dr. Evian Leidig, who did research on women and young women in right-wing extremism. Then she will be followed by a presentation by Associate Professor Nina Keeshage, who more or less did the same, but then for women in the radical Islamic milieu. During their presentation, I invite you to post questions to them in the chat. On the top right of my bottom of my screen, I find the chat. And if you would be so kind to post your questions and remarks over there, then I will be able to read them out to our panel or to our speakers so they can answer it. After the presentation by Dr. Evian and Associate Professor Nina, we will do a little Q&A with them and discuss a little bit and see if we can get some of your questions answered. And then we'll move over to the practitioners, Amina Mustafa and Nicole Attilio, who are both have spent quite some years in empowering girls, in working with girls and young women, who will then put on the practitioners classes. And then we'll have some more time for Q&A and discussions. And by that time, it should be more or less 4:30, and we're done. We are recording this this webinar, or if we don't, we should start recording this webinar. So it will be published afterwards. As an audience, I'm afraid you cannot turn on your camera or microphone, or at least it will not be shown to the others. So please use the chat to post your questions. Sometimes people face difficulties with sound, and the solution very often is logging off and logging on, do a little prayer, and then it might work. So as I told you, we're going to record the webinar and we're going to publish it. And I checked with the two experts who will start off in our meeting that they will provide us with a version of their PowerPoint that we can share with you afterwards. So we will send you the PowerPoints afterwards. Having said so, I think there's one more thing, a practical thing we're mentioning in every RAN meeting at the moment. Because this is an official project being done by the official European Commission, we are asking people not to use words like I am the RAN or I'm a part of the RAN team or things like that. You are definitely able to say you were part of meetings and you support the RAN or whatever, but please don't tell you are RAN if you are not. We are being instructed by the Commission, as you can imagine, to communicate this message. I think then that's the end of your slide, Carlijn. Yes, it is. I'm going to put on a little Mentimeter. You know the drill, because we would like to get a little feedback from the participants. 33 in number right now. Oh, 32. Somebody already left. So I'm going to share my screen, and I hope I'm able to pull off this technical trick. And otherwise, I hope Christmas is coming soon. Let's see. Here is my Mentimeter. The recording has indeed started. My invitation to you is, I think you're able to see the power of the Mentimeter. Is this correct, Carlijn? Yes. You can take a picture and use the QR code to log in or surf to www.menti.com and enter the code 18208037. I think you can all read this on the screen. I can read it out once more in case you're in another screen. Go to menti.com, www.menti.com, and enter the code 18208037. And I see 9 people are already able to find it. So use the QR code or go to www.menti.com and enter the code 18208037. I'll just pause a little bit to allow people to complete this difficult technical challenge. If I can do this, you should be able to do so as well. As you can see by the little thumbs up on the bottom, 16 people already managed, 17 people are still dropping in. If you push the little thumbs up, I can see you're in the room. Yeah, there we are. Last sprint. I think this is more or less, yes, the number. So I think if I now click on this one, I hope, yes, you should be able to see a little screen with a slider. And we just would like to hear from you. If in your country, you have the sense, you have the impression that extremism is on the rise. And I would prefer if you would answer it from your own perspective, and not so much from what others tell you. So this is sort of reality check. Please use the slider You don't see it, Carlijn? No?
Mine's not working, but maybe we have to press present. At the
I'm going to press present.
maybe. Yes.
And there it is. Thank you. Where would I be without you, Carlijn? Thank you. It's the slider. You can see it now. Be so kind to slide it to the extreme radical right if you think you strongly agree with the thing mentioned, and keep it on the left if you would say you strongly disagree. This is no science, but it could be interesting for panel discussions later. And it could be interesting for the experts speaking. (17, 18). I think the picture's getting clear. Despite what some people thought a year ago, I would say that there is concern about extremism being on the rise. I can imagine because of the Gaza stuff, right-wing sentiments being translated into electoral results. I'm from the Netherlands. You might have heard about our elections. And that sort of fuels also, for instance, we have some extreme left-wing extremism. There is concern about extremists targeting girls and young women. We will definitely hear from Evian and Nina about what they, from the right-wing extremist scene and from the radical Islamist scene, how they see this. And there's indeed support from this group for the idea that girls and young women are too often forgotten in PVE. It's just like in a normal classroom. The boys are the most naughty, the boys get all the attention, and the girls are forgotten. Let me see. Next. That must be here. The last one, a word cloud. Hope it's going to work. Are you able to type already? Carlijn, can you type already a word or not? Good. There you are. Please take a look on the screen while you're typing, because if you type the same sort of word, if you want to type something like something that's on the screen and you use the same wording, it will grow bigger and bigger. What makes girls and young women vulnerable to extremist groups and their recruitments? Some say it's a kaleidoscope of factors. That's what Magnus Ransdorp wrote in different papers we issued as Radicalisation Awareness Network. But I would like to hear your opinion. What factors make young girls, young women and women vulnerable to extremist groups and their recruitment strategies? This is sort of a reality check because the ladies will tell about their research. They've been researching women in extremist environments. They will definitely, I think, underline some of the things mentioned here. 18 people. There might be some more people typing. If you're reading this, it's always interesting to see if some things are the same. Don't see too many grievances, sensationalism, gender inequality. Some say it's the same as boys. Well, let's find out if it's the same. And I promise you, you will get this slide as well afterwards. Could be interesting. Evian and Nina, please take a look at the screen. I think you're doing this already. See whether or not you think this is in line with what you are also seeing. I think I'm gonna stop here. Are some people still typing? Counting down. No, this is more or less it. Relationships, loneliness, gender roles, love, lack of love, perhaps belonging. Perhaps they find love in the scene. Conditions, relations, to take part in community. Inequalities, there's more inequality on there. I think we've got it, social inequality. I promise I will send it to you, and perhaps I might share it a little later in this session. Thank you for typing. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, because I think this is quite an interesting kickoff for Dr. Evian Leidig, who did research on right-wing extremism or far right. Dr. Evian is a researcher at the Tilburg University and author of the book The Women of the Far Right. I stumbled upon her articles in the preparation of this meeting, and I liked the lure of the sisterhood, which she painted. And she looked into influencers on social media who portrayed threat wives, or I'm not sure which word she's going to use, more or less traditional, happily married mothers supporting their far right husbands and making their white compatriots right. Evian, would you be so kind to present your findings?
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to pull up my slides here. It's also really great to see some of the responses from the participants, because indeed there is some overlap that I noticed for what I will present today. So to get started, indeed, I have been focusing primarily on far-right women influencers, as you can see from the book behind me. This is my recent research. And just as a note, I call these women influencers because they serve as leading online personalities that are helping to shape and popularize ideas within the far-right movement. And they rely specifically on practices that are derived from influencer culture. That is certain genres and practices that I will demonstrate with some examples in the slides. Now, what is particular to influencers is that they will often display the way they live their politics as an aspirational brand. So by this, I mean that they merge their politics and their personal lifestyle into one type of brand that they showcase for their followers. And not to get too theoretical, but I like this concept of networked intimacy. As a way to explain what are the various techniques that these influencers will use to build and maintain their personal brands to their followers. So an example that you see there on the left is taken from a French influencer, formerly a spokesperson for the identitarian movement, like the Scoufon. It's an Instagram story of her editing videos that will be released on her YouTube channel. As you can see, she uses the countdown sticker on that Instagram story. And then if her followers tap that, they'll get a reminder about when that YouTube video is going to be released on her channel. Now, this is definitely a tactic that marketing and PR companies have used to announce product launches and to get their audiences excited about products. But I show how these influencers are using those same types of marketing techniques to build interest and excitement with their followers. The one next to that is a popular TikTok account. And she uses things like chats and getting ready with me to invite her followers into the day-to-day aspects of her life being at home. Now, in my research, I show how influencer practices on social media platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok are used as an effective radicalization strategy by these far-right actors. And in particular, these influencers are very good at coming across as being relatable, accessible, authentic, and responsive to their followers. But we should take this with a grain of salt. This is also an audience perception. We don't necessarily know what the day-to-day lived reality is for these women, but what they choose to showcase through their social media performance, you could say. But I show in my work how this is a very deliberate strategy that can present an opportunity for far-right individuals to deliver propaganda on social media. And in many ways, they sort of legitimize that, or they have a legitimizing effect of their political ideology in doing so. They normalize a lot of the ideas and ideology in this way. One of the most popular mediums is through a genre of what I called red pill vlogs on YouTube. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the red pill is a euphemism that far-right actors use to signal the first step of their radicalization journey. It comes from the film The Matrix. And for the far-right, this means developing attitudes around anti-feminism, anti-liberalism, and beliefs in conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement, or more recently, the Great Reset during the pandemic. And I'm happy to break down some of this terminology in the Q&A for anybody who has questions. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see some videos, some of these red pill videos that these influencers have posted, and it's titles like My Red Pill Journey, or below that called Origin Story. I think Origin Story is an interesting title because it signals like a type of rebirth or reawakening after having been red pilled for this influencer. And in these videos, these red pill vlogs, these influencers will go very much in depth into their life histories, their background, and listening to their stories, I noticed they have very similar backgrounds, actually. So many of them describe growing up in middle-class families, in middle-class neighborhoods. Most of these women had attended university and then continued to work in corporate jobs, living in urban areas and socializing with friends and with colleagues. And then there's a moment in time in which all these influencers describe feeling deeply unhappy and depressed with their life situation. And here they attribute feminism for that unhappiness because they believe that feminism forces women unnaturally into public life, into public work roles. So for these women, traditionalism becomes the antidote to feminism. And they believe that if we are subscribed to traditional gender roles in which women are at home and men are the primary breadwinners for their families, we will find true happiness in society. Now, what's interesting to me is for these influencers, they will often create a follow-up video after their first red pill vlogs. It's the videos you see there on the right-hand side of the screen with titles like I Lost All My Friends in the Culture War, or below that, Red Pilled Losing Friends. These influencers are sitting crying in front of the webcam, talking about the pain they suffered from losing family and friends, their social support networks after having been red pilled. But for these influencers, they see their red pilling experience as something that is worthy and courageous. So they say, I'm just finding my most authentic self, my most confident self. And thus these narratives of authenticity mask a hateful ideology and ideas that they promote. Now, if there's one thing I would like for you to remember from this, is that I assumed that most of these far-right women influencers would be recruiting other women into the far right. I actually found that on YouTube, not on Instagram, but on YouTube, they tended to have much more male viewers. In fact, one of them had said she looked at her YouTube analytics and 85% of her viewers were male, which is quite a striking number. And they specifically will tailor content towards their male viewers. So they'll have videos on the top left with titles like The War on Men, in which they argue that mainstream society prohibits men from exercising their natural biological traits of masculinity, like leadership, aggression, dominance, and that if young men join the far right, they can exercise these traits and ideally find a submissive wife. On the right-hand side, this influencer solicited suggestions from her followers, what should be the next video for on my channel. And she was getting questions like, how do I red pill my sister, my girlfriend, my wife, all the women in my life, basically. So she created this video specifically for her male followers, how to red pill women. Oftentimes, these influencers will use things like scientific studies or statistics from government agencies to argue their point that traditional gender roles in which women exercise their femininity and men their masculinity will make us as individuals happier and will create a functioning society. And then along the way, I discovered how these women were also sharing and promoting accounts on social media, like the one on the bottom right, promoting sort of these traditional interpretations of gender. I think the one on the bottom right used to be run by an identitarian, a generation identitarian account. That text, Europe is the new white, promoting ideas that men are the providers and protectors of the family. But otherwise, what I often found was quite a potent narrative was actually narratives around self-help and improvement. And for these influencers, modeling themselves along aspects of inspiration and aspiration. So on the bottom left, this is an Instagram post. It's a before and after selfie of an influencer. She writes in the description, glow up. If it happened to me, it can happen to anyone. Pick one, undereating, in a bad relationship for 7 years, heavy smoker, feeling numb inside, loss. Pick two, eating healthy, married and pregnant, off all drugs, feeling joy and gratitude for my life, saved. And she writes in at the bottom, these pics were taken 4 years apart and it didn't happen overnight. You've got to put in the work for the reward. Be patient with yourself. Deprogramming is a long process. Now, on the surface, there doesn't seem to be anything inherently political about this post until you actually understand the type of coded language that these influencers are using to get across their ideological messaging. So she's actually using the phrase glow up, a phrase that comes from the beauty blogging community, to signify her own radicalization journey, and using words like deprogramming as well, meaning deprogramming from a liberal indoctrination. But what is quite common across these influencers is also how they are modeling aspirational outputs too, like the photo on the right. It's an Instagram story with a forthcoming video on her YouTube channel called How I Overcame Feeling Insecure and Self-Conscious All the Time. Again, with that sort of countdown sticker you see there. Perhaps expectedly, a central trope, a mobilizing factor for women within the far right is also how they primarily see themselves as the wives and mothers of the movement. And there's a long history and tradition of that. And I don't want to neglect a lot of the research and work that's been done recognizing that space. But I wanted to understand how they showcase that today to their followers. And they often create YouTube channels like the one at the top there called Motherland, in which they share tips about parenting, about everything from breastfeeding to becoming, to pregnancy and to delivery, etc. Also writing ebooks, for example, and here on the bottom right, that Instagram story in which this influencer is asking her followers, you know, is this ebook something that will be of value to you or somebody you know? So they're actively involving their followers into sort of the creation process and that type of interaction, which we didn't necessarily see a decade or two ago. I was asked to talk about sisterhood, so I will touch briefly upon sisterhood, but also one that I think is transnationally oriented and something we tend to forget when we look at the far right. From the left-hand side, these are interviews hosted on an influencer's channel in which he talks to other prominent far-right female activists within this space. And these are very informal conversations, chats, everything ranging from, you know, tell me about your background, how did you get involved in political activism, what was it like actually finding friends within this movement, and sort of a get-to-know interview format. But then also, when they do meet each other offline, how important it is for them to also take selfies. And I argue this is a display of transnational sisterhood when they actually get to meet each other for the first time and sort of showcase their friendship to the viewers. And they're telling young women, if you join us, you can find like-minded women like ourselves within this movement. And we are a global one. Before I get then to the end about practicalities of challenging this or countering far right, because these are influencers, they also get a lot of sponsors for the content that they put out. On the left-hand side, this is actually a tampon company that sponsors some of the influencers I studied. And if you actually look more closely at the language they use a lot of anti-gender inclusive rhetoric, saying things like periods are for women only, pregnancy is for women only, sort of against what they see as, quote, the erasure of women and women's biological abilities. I should say female, they equate female and women. And these influencers are also sponsored by things like merchandise companies, clothing apparel that also promotes messaging about traditional gender roles and the family unit, as you see there on the right. Sorry, I'm going a bit fast, but I only have 15 minutes, you know. I'm trying to get through it. And then finally, also we see them being sponsored by beauty and by wellness companies as well, sharing with their followers discount codes for these various products and also showing like how they use these products in their everyday lives. And while we know that beauty and wellness bloggers have long recommended products and work with corporate sponsors, the messaging here is very deliberate in terms of they're both selling a lifestyle as well as an ideology behind it. And perhaps predictably, because somebody I had seen mentioned in the feedback something about misinformation, and indeed that is something that I see come up quite often in this space, is in particular medical mis and disinformation surrounding things like oral contraceptive pills for birth control, for example, actually showcasing scientific studies, or rather cherry picking certain scientific studies about how hormonal contraception actually makes its way into the water supply systems, for example, and that's why they want to distill tap water. And during COVID, similarly, this was highlighted through pseudoscientific studies about how the COVID vaccine would cause women to experience a disrupted menstrual cycle, or how women who participated in the Pfizer COVID trial vaccine experienced a miscarriage. And particularly during the pandemic, spreading a lot of scientific disinformation about the vaccine in terms of its effects on female and male fertility, and overlaying that with conspiracy theories about population sterilization. So to conclude, because I know I'm very short on time and you can cut me off, I do focus primarily on online aspects, encountering the far right online in my work. And I also talk about the role of counter influencers, for example, who often will debunk or demystify a lot of far right narratives. So there's some, I'm happy to talk more about that during the Q&A. But I will just leave this up in terms of perhaps offline strategies that we can think about, things like education and trying to prevent stuff like generational amnesia about feminism and women's rights. The photo you see there is actually an advertisement from the 1950s about a husband spanking his wife for not buying fresh coffee. And this was actually like a very popular advertisement, but for us as a society, not forgetting the advances of women's rights and feminism and actually how important that legacy is for today. Perhaps more on the policy side, how various government counter-extremism strategies should, of course, include gender approaches, understanding what is the motivation for individuals into entering these movements, how do they see their roles, what are the various ways that they become involved within the far right, and then the implications this has in terms of exiting and sometimes even re-entering these movements and these spaces, as some of these influencers themselves have re-entered after left for a short period of time. Finally, how our political leaders talk about gender matters a great deal, of course. For these far-right women influencers, they all talked about how Trump was this strong man, and actually how they very much saw Trump embody certain masculine traits that they desired from men in society. And then finally, of course, we will hear about this from the practitioner side, social support networks, whether personal or society-wide level, particularly when these influencers were talking about how painful it was losing family and friends after having been red-pilled, how that intervention at such a crucial stage could have actually been quite significant for their journeys. So that's it from me. And there's the link for the book, and then I will put my email in the chat for anyone who wants to contact me. Thank you.
Excellent. 15 minutes plus 1 or 2 on time. Lovely presentation. And once again, like showing how sometimes confusing this all is, because it goes from well-being, food, lifestyle kind of stuff to COVID conspiracies, to group identitaire being white supremacists, anti-Semites. So it ranges from different perspectives. It's not clear-cut evil. It's not clear-cut white supremacy, for instance. There's some of it in there. There's some conspiracy. and I can imagine why people are intrigued by this. We're not going to do the Q&A now. We're going to do it after Nina did. Nicola already wrote a question in the chat. I want to invite all of you to post your questions for Evian in the chat. I wrote down some as well. And perhaps, Evian, I'm going to surprise you. Do you have perhaps a question for Nina, who will now take the floor? Is there anything that you would like to hear from Nina or suggest, or you're curious about the Islamist?
I imagine there will be some overlap, actually, in terms of perhaps the personal grievances that drive women into engagement with these groups. But I'm also curious about what some of the differences might be as well. So, no, I'm just looking forward to Nina's talk. I'm
curious as well. Let's move over to, thank you, Evian. Thank you very, very much in these busy times before Christmas for attending here. We're going to move over to Associate Professor Dr. Nina Keesehage, who is a researcher at the Johann Wolfgang Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main. Johann Wolfgang Goethe University, that sounds really posh, really interesting. Next year, it's going to be a great year for Nina because her book Frauen in Jihad, Women in Jihad, will be published. She did a lot of research on women, returning women, and she also learned something about different PFE programs for girls, and she organized workshops for practitioners on gender-specific prevention work. So thank you already for attending, Nina. Would you be so kind to kick off and share your expertise with the group?
Of course. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Stephen.
Great to have you here.
So I'm going to show you my presentation. It's a little bit larger, so I guess I have to speak a little bit faster than I originally wanted, and I hope you can hear me because my voice is a bit damaged due to the cold. So if you don't understand me that good, please put some questions in the chat. Talking about the different facets of girls and women in the radical Islamic milieu. And I have chosen this topic because I think there are two sides if we're talking about the vulnerability for women and also for girls regarding this extremist milieu. The first one is something we can see, maybe what's obvious, some things like loneliness, aspects like that have been mentioned before here. And the other aspect is that we are all, and I guess that is maybe something which is true for pretty much extremist milieus, no matter if it's coming from the jihadist or from the right-wing or left-wing milieu, is that we all in public have a common expectation, or maybe also a gender stereotype regarding women and their roles. For instance, mothers. What is a typical role for a mother, or what would you understand if you're thinking about the topic of mother? So let's have a look. If we could maybe deconstruct these gender roles ourselves, which might be very useful also in terms of the prevention work, as far as I can see after being there involved within the last 12 years. As Stephen has pointed out, I have conducted interviews with more than 300 people during 2011 and 2021. And first of all, I conducted interviews with jihadists and Salafi preachers, and also with female adherents. And then I went in my habilitation thesis a step further, and I conducted also interviews with minors, in particular with children, and also with teenagers who went abroad to join Daesh with their German mothers. So what I'm looking about is radicalization in terms of the jihadist and the Salafist milieu in Europe different, for instance. And I am also interested in the amalgamation of radicalization, extremism, and also gender. So if we're looking at gender and extremism, we are coming to different definitions related to the term gender. What does gender mean? In fact, gender is a socially constructed concept in which people have different ideas. But if we're looking to PVE programs, if you put the term gender inside, gender is very often used as a shift for women or for girls. But is this really gender? No, gender is more than this. So maybe this is also something we should work if we are talking about practical impetus regarding the social work that is really working. Because if you're maybe a radicalized girl and you're looking at a program or at an organization you could turn to, maybe you're looking also at the terms and the terminology that is used when people are talking with you. So looking at this famous term gender, which has become pretty much of importance for social and legal discourses as well in contemporary times, we can look at the NATO Women, Peace and Security premise, which has also a term dealing with the gender-sensitive language, which is, for instance, in some of the European countries, except England, where we don't have this specificity differentiating between the language, which is sometimes also causing discrimination, and which is sometimes also an origin for people being alienated. We can see that these, on the one hand, these measures are built to promote females' issues, and on the other hand, they are the source for people radicalization in, for instance, the far right. So this hypermasculinity is very often originating from this gender-sensitive language measures and gender-sensitive politics and so on and so forth. So another aspect that is looked about in these programs since 10 years is how do women participate within extremist groups. Pardon. And how are they influenced by the group's messages? Are they influenced in the same manner as men are? As we could see in the run slide at the beginning, some said yes, they have the same radicalization process they are going through. Others said no, there's something different. With regard to my experiences in the field, talking with real people, I can say there are differences. I will subsum then some slides later on, but please keep in mind that I have really found out here are some differences. And this might be interesting if you're looking on real research with people, talking to people who experienced the radicalization process and who gone through it and maybe want to distance themselves from these extremist ideas, then it might be wise to see which motives have seduced them to go into this group. So this means also for us on a meta level that we have new security challenges, for instance, in terms of counterterrorism, prevention of violent extremism, and de-radicalization. So here's just a slide for you. If or Stephen is going to send it to you, it might be interesting because it originates from the Brave project, which I found is a brilliant project, and it shows all the measures and all the motives and all the facets of violent extremism, which we are talking about here. So reasons for the radicalization of females, at least in the jihadist milieu, is, for instance, the alienation of all Muslim citizens in so-called Western countries. So, you know, East and the West is also a concept, and it's a socially constructed concept. But what does this make with people on the ground? We have to talk about it. So another point, when you're looking at the extremism research, is that there is a trend to the Islamization of extremism. We have a lot of extremist phenomena, but we are still concentrating on the radical Islam, on the so-called Islamists. Why is this a point? And this is something also when you're talking to girls who are very well aware about what is just and what is unjust, they will say exactly this point to you on a lower level, not on a scientific level, but you will see that this is also something that is been recognized by the females you're talking and you are working with. When I talk, for instance, to a lot of girls in the jihadist scene in Belgium and in France, they are mainly talking about a lack of professional possibilities. There were no money, there's no money, there's no job possibility because they're wearing the wheel and because of their alienation due to the fact they are wearing the so-called Islamic clothes. So could this be a key factor to integration, to stop alienating people just because of their appearance? Another point, I cannot, I cannot mention them all because I'm looking at the time, which is running off there. Is some girls with which I talked told me they have a tendency for bad boys who will bring them into trouble, but they have an individual interest in these boys. And another very important aspect is gendered Islamophobia. What can we understand about gendered Islamophobia? If you're looking to the example of France, Islam is the second largest religious community there. But on the other hand, we have a study with French Muslims just 2 years ago, and they are talking about them being discriminated and alienated at secular schools. Because, we have the laïcité, the concept of dividing between the secular state and the religious matters on the other hand. But if something has happened and it is an attack, and this attack occurs from a person who appears to be a Muslim, then the whole religion of Islam is alienated. And the very famous scholar Olivier Roy already said, it is a large interview in Le Monde in 2016, that although most of the persons working in security and in intelligence are origin from Muslim background, people do not only condemn the attacks, they condemn the whole religion Islam and the whole Muslim population. And this is part of the problem that leads to further discrimination, and that leads to people who are going into the process of radicalization. So the real Muslim, Olivier Roy said, is something that is understood to be a terrorist, and this is in particular be seen in the launch of the so-called anti-separatism bill. So separatism is only a shift word for jihadist terrorism and Islamic extremism. And I want to go to this example here. So we have an Olympic athlete, and she is a French, but she wears a wheel, and she said, this is what happens when you normalize anti-Islamic and anti-Muslim hate speech. And we're talking about hate speech here that drives people into radicalization. Then you can see that Islamophobia is written into law, and that is happening in a European country, in a democracy, next to Germany, for instance. And you can see this leads to perception of gender, like this girl I talked to in France as well. And she said, the perception of Islam was not based on knowledge, but it was based on gender. Men have the right to say what is right or wrong regarding religion, although they even don't have any essential religious knowledge. But when she is empowered by the fundamentalist interpretation of Islam, she has started a new life. She's on the path of Allah and she's empowered very much. And this is something we should keep in mind when talking to girls who are radicalized in the jihadist milieu. They have in their minds the empowerment, and they grew strong with this understanding, with this empowerment, and with this support from the jihadist group. Here's another example of a Somali-born French model as well. She's also criticizing this hate speech, which is legalized in France in contemporary times. So, what are the gender-sensitive approaches to prevention work? Some recommendations, only some of them. From my experience on the ground, doing workshops for social workers for over 10 years now, it is necessary to understand, not to be a religious scholar themselves, but to understand how religion is working, how religious concepts, how gender roles, how stereotypes are working in a jihadist environment. So it's better to participate at those trainings if you're working in social work, to better deconstruct yourself these concepts in order to understand what is happening. Also, it is very important to talk about the empowerment of girls and women's of their own body, not about their own bodies in a free way, not at their families who are very conservative, not at the jihadist milieu, which are even more conservative. So if you empower them to talk about their own bodies, their own interests, their own individual professional ambitions, you empower them to free themselves from this patriarchal understandings of being a good, being a modest woman, being a modest Muslima. So you tackle misogyny, Islamophobia, and anti-Islamic racism. And if this is done consequently, people won't go into this vicious circle of radicalization and re-radicalization if they're coming back from Daesh. Some examples of European gender studies, gender possibilities and approaches within the gender-sensitive PVE work in Europe are, for instance, women. WMEX is or was a program that was tackling radical approaches from the jihadist and or the right-wing milieu towards young females. And it was there to build awareness for female radicalization inside and outside of the group, so that the public is also informed, and they are working very closely together with scientific and also with politics. And we have a very famous program which is called the Mother Schools. It is promoted by Women Without Borders, but also other migrants from migrants, SIDASA in the Czech Republic, the United Nations, and other groups and organizations are supporting this approach, which is based on the emotional connection of mothers to enable their children to tackle radical narratives. So this is a very, very a good program I would recommend for other countries as well. And we have some on and offline approaches. For instance, Bavarian's de-radicalization project, which is working on the intervention points for gender-sensitive de-radicalization work with women and girls in the area of Salafism, and I guess also in the area of jihadism. The NISA project, which is quite interesting because it is an online project, and it is working on and focusing on patriarchal hegemony, for instance, sexual violence, radicalization, but it is behind a mask. So people are not seen, and people don't have to be feel ashamed to talk about these sensitive topics. Islam is also a German initiative for the promotion of female roles in the nexus of PVE. And the Diamond program, I guess my fellow Dutch colleagues already know it by heart. It is a Dutch initiative which is also tackling identity problems. For instance, the lover boy seducing girls into sexual work. Pardon. So to conclude here, I guess I have about 1 minute left still. Yeah. All right. So
Well, actually,
my last
yeah, well,
slide.
take another minute, but that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So to conclude here, I would like to raise 3 points. The first one is the gender-based exclusion and the instrumentalization of discrimination, which is practiced by the jihadist group, and it should be tackled on and offline in order to prevent the further radicalization of females and of girls. And if you're doing this, please don't use yourself gender stereotypes, which is sometimes done. It is not done on purpose, but it is done because people don't know better, or they want to make a joke. They want to light up the atmosphere. But if they are using the same stereotypes that the others in public are using, they won't be authentic people these vulnerable individuals want to talk to. So it is very useful to address affective and emotional dimensions of the concerned people. Like our host has said before, communication should not only be about facts and figures, because feelings of fear, threat, and injustice are perhaps even more important. And I guess that is a very good sentence to conclude with this very multifaceted phenomenon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's always smart to end with the quote that's made by me. But thank you, Nina. Thank you, Evian. I'm taking a look at the questions now. We are a little late on time, but we're still doing fine. Before I go to the practitioners who are already ready to participate, I'm going to take a look at the questions. There was a question, Evian, about the red pills, the pills in the radicalization process. Is that the same as in the manosphere, or I would add, is it the same as in the COVID conspiracy scene? What is this red pilling that you were talking about? What kind of red pills are there?
Thanks for the question. So the term the red pill does come from the manosphere, as well as then adjacent terminology like the black pill, etc. So the term the red pill comes from the film The Matrix, in which the protagonist Neo is offered to take the red pill and be awakened to the truth of society, or take the blue pill and continue to live a life of ignorance and delusion. And so this terminology was popularized within the manosphere as this notion that society is being mainstream society is being controlled by feminists intent on suppressing men. So that's how it originated within the manosphere, and then it got adopted within the far right as a way of agreeing with this framework of anti-feminism, but then taking it a step further in terms of then adopting anti-immigrant, anti-Semitic, xenophobic attitudes as well. So it just, in answer to that question, yes, it is sort of the same, but it was adopted from the manosphere. And then these far-right actors continue to use that phrase, like being red-pilled. Also, black-pilled is this concept of being nihilistic about society, feeling like there's no change that can be achieved. And this is a term commonly used by incels, for example. So they do adopt a lot of that terminology.
And if I'm correct, it's also used in the COVID measures, QAnon kind of conspiracy scene, where they also describe this word red pill, that when they're awake, when they're not a sheep, when they're not sheep anymore, when they see what's really going on, like a new reality, or the real reality. I don't know how to call it.
Yeah, tied up with conspiracies about government control of populations and surveillance and things like that. So I think we've started to see the term start to be adopted through a plethora of different ideological networks and groups. But thank you
Yes,
for that
exactly.
question.
Nina, can I ask you something else? Watching the approaches you presented, I recognized several of them actually, but I also know them already for like 8 years, most of them. Am I correct that there was indeed, especially during the years of this so-called caliphate, there was a lot of resilience building kind of stuff aiming at young women and girls because they were also leaving for this hideous project of the so-called caliphate. But do you think is there still a need for, nowadays, PvE, gender sensitive targeting nowadays, narratives and extremism? Because I know many of these projects you showed, and they are actually, I would say, old school. And is that matching the new stuff?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Stephen. Some of them might probably be old school, but others I think are, when you're talking to real people and you are things are repeating, patterns are repeating, motives are repeating, and I guess some of the motives that I wanted to point out, which are very, very important, still important, in every radicalization process, is the alienation of others. And this starts by the appearance, this starts by the ability to work, the ability to do whatever you want to. This starts off by gender roles, and gender roles are still the old school gender roles. Otherwise, we won't have this increase of right-wing extremism, and we won't have the increase of female right-wing extremism, as Evian has pointed out brilliantly, with the help of the internet. Because they are increasing in the old-fashioned ways of thinking. What is a family? For us, it is quite clear. We don't have to ask if a man has to be a strong man or a weak man or whatsoever role is applied on this male role in order to be a good person or to build a family. But for the people who are going into this radicalization process, it plays a role, and therefore these old stereotypes are still the new stereotypes we are tackling. And we have to ask ourselves, and I think therefore it is quite interesting to see what the internet has done. It started out by promoting health and fitness and certain things about females. How do they have to look to be beautiful, to be accepted socially? And to become a better person. And then it goes into the extreme. And maybe we have to look at this aspect, which is going, which is only dealing with people's appearing, with people's outlook, and not with the things inside. And if people are they are telling others they are feminists, then we have to look at the real messages of the true feminists and have to compare them with them. And then we can deconstruct them, because these messages from the so-called new feminists are in fact the messages from the pre-feminists. So old school is here, summa summarum, always a very, very hot topic. Thank you for the question.
Muted myself. Thank you, Nina. One last question for Evianne. That's a question posted by Iona. And I had the same question, actually. So you said 80% of the followers were men. What is the the lure of the sisterhood that you mentioned somewhere. What is that all about? And is this also a vehicle? Are these female influencers also a vehicle for young women to enter the scene? Any ideas there?
So I do want to clarify that when I cited that statistic about 85% of that influencer's viewers being male, that was for her YouTube channel. Now, just to backtrack a bit, these far-right women influencers, they do something similar to their male counterparts, which is on YouTube, they talk about politics or they talk about current events and affairs. But they will also then post on their Instagram pages gardening with their kids or cooking dinner for their families, right? And so I think they're able to use different types of social media platforms in different ways where they can try to reach their target audiences. Now, I did speak to a young man who had been radicalized watching these YouTube videos and was in the process of de-radicalizing. And he told to me, he said that I watched these women that I had studied, so at least I knew I was on the right track in terms of who were the most prominent women within this movement. But he also said to me that a movement without women is doomed to fail. And I found that to be quite striking because it also, for me, sort of led to this idea of what would be the purpose of these women in terms of being quite visibly out there. And on the one hand, I think they very much do normalize or legitimize a lot of these more extreme ideas to mainstream audiences because they present it in these very soft and subtle framings for their audiences in ways that are so different from their male counterparts. And that's why they're still actually on these platforms. A lot of their male counterparts have been banned from a lot of social media platforms because they're very explicit in their rhetoric or they're more violent in their rhetoric, but these women just kind of hint at a more subtle interpretation of their messaging.
Would you say they are also part of, because it's an interesting mixture of traditionalism or deliberately rejecting feminism, which is not extremism as such, I would say. They can do this. How much extremism is there in that scene? How much, for instance, anti-Semitism or harmful anti-gender stuff is there, or even white supremacy?
Yeah, I mean, so it does depend, of course, a bit on the influencers. Some might say are a bit more extreme ideologically than others. But for example, I showed a screenshot from a YouTube channel called Motherland, which is two influencers when they were discussing parenting
Looked
tips.
quite innocent, actually.
It does.
Pastoral.
It doesn't have any red flags, so you would think, okay, this is just a mommy blogging account. But I would listen in to these 1-2 hour live streams, and halfway through a live stream, one of them would be breastfeeding and then talk about their duty to save the white race by having babies. So, I mean, it is explicit language, but it's not until you actually sit down and really listen through all that content that you realize, okay, there are certain red flags that they will drop in their content here and there to indicate their more extreme views. But they're very good, I think, at balancing that in terms of, content that is palatable, that's sort of, not apolitical, and then content that can be quite extreme and they kind of will test the waters, you could say.
Exactly, and
But
there's two difficulties there. It's difficult for the moderation to take stuff off because it's not clear-cut bad stuff. It's not clear-cut propaganda. And at the same time, the other problem is that it's also sugar coating, dog whistling, it's packaging even harmful extremist ideologies and commitments in lifestyle, in health and beauty and whatever kind of stuff, which is from a prevention kind of stuff, of course, quite problematic. I'm only watching this woman talking about how she's doing planks and sit-ups in the morning before she feeds her children, and then so it's challenging. Nina and Evian, I'm going to move over to the other two invited ladies. And let's see the practitioner side. They are both working with girls and young women. We're looking at Amina Mustafa from Ireland, the development director of the Sports Against Racism Ireland. one of these projects that has been featuring in the several RAN meetings. She developed the organization for 9 years. She did, and this is a famous one, the Hijabs and Hat Tricks program, where young women were invited to play football after being excluded from the sport before, and then the lift on the ban opened an opportunity for Amina to engage with these young girls and women and play football. And the other person is Nicole Attilio, and I would say interesting Argentinian English lady. She's from Argentine, working for the London-based UK youth. People working in youth work and informal education will know UK youth for the methods they develop and the websites they build. It is also how Carlijn, my colleague, stumbled upon you, because Empower Her is an excellent repository. Well, I'm not a native speaker. It's a nice library full of methods and materials for girls' empowerment. What did you pick up from the experts when it came to this extremism and the role of women and young girls? How does that relate to what you are doing in your day-to-day activities? Would like to go first, Nicole.
It's up to you. Would you like to go first? Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, lovely, fantastic. First of all, thank you so much, Stephen, for having us. It's a huge pleasure to be here on this panel. As Stephen said, my name is Nicole and I work with young people. I work at UK Youth, which is a national charity based in London, but we work across the UK. My role as a project manager on Empower, which is the program that Stephen very well mentioned, is a program that uses social action as a mechanism to improve the young women and girls that engage on the program, to improve and increase their mental health. So thinking about Nina's presentation and how she said that it's very important for us to think about these young people or these young women and girls and offer them a space, a safe space to talk about their bodies, to talk about puberty, to talk about periods, to talk about role models, feminism, human rights. That's precisely what Empower is about. I'm going to put in the chat the link to the Empower Toolkit, which is, as Stephen said, it's published on our website, and it's a toolkit with ready-to-go activities and session plans that the youth workers use to deliver these sessions with the young women and girls. So the purpose of this...
Carlijn, can I interrupt you for a second, Nicole? Because Carlijn and I will also send an email to the people attending this webinar. And we will make a specific document also pointing to some of the lovely work that you've been doing.
Lovely, fantastic.
And perhaps also other stuff that Nina and Evian would like to share. So we'll send a little document afterwards with important, useful links. Carry on.
Fantastic, thank you. So what we've noticed is that we delivered this program from 2018 to 2021. We've engaged with over 1,800 young women across England. And some of the outcomes were around the increased in the sense of belonging, the sense of community, and self-confidence. So through taking part on Empower, through doing social action, the young women and girls felt heard. They felt that they could have a positive impact on their communities. And also they found that by taking part in those Empower sessions, talking about things that interest them, they could find other young women and girls that they could talk about these things with. And that's something that we really encourage. And that's the power of youth work. It's having a trusted adult that you can have conversations with around topics that you might not be able to discuss at home or with your family or with other people that you normally engage with. So that's the thing that stuck with me about Nina's presentation. Back to your question, Stephen, and how youth work can help in creating those safe spaces for young women and girls to discuss the things that are challenging and relevant to them.
Excellent. Before I move to you, Amina, I think this makes so clear that if you look at I'm not going to show it again, the Mentimeter and the results of the factors that make people vulnerable to extremist recruitment or radicalization, mobilization kind of messages. In the core, it's the same things that you were discussing, Nicole, as what is important to people, the questions they have, the pain they have, the confusion they have. That's actually the stuff that recruiters tap into, that extremists are known to tap into: perceived grievances, sense of belonging. Well, those are the two main, I would say. Yeah, if I would pick two, I think those would be my favorite two. If I were a recruiter or a radicalizer, or if I would be a youth worker. So yeah, thank you. I think this is, it's a beautiful example of safe spaces creating opportunities for people to channel their anger, their fear, their insecurity in a safe environment into a safe direction.
Absolutely.
Because if that's not done, it might go somewhere else. Amina, you've been listening very, very silently. Observations, questions before I will shoot some in your direction?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks to Nina and Evian for your presentation. There was a lot of like considerations that you've mentioned in your presentation that I could see embedded, particularly with some of the references on the last slide, Nina, of your presentation, that we've embedded in our programs and practices, and then going to belonging as one of the key words that was popping out for me that I saw on the Mentimeter. Like that is something that the initiative that you mentioned earlier, the Hijabs and Hat Tricks program, was really trying to address. So just to do a quick introduction to that program and the organization that I'm representing. So I'm here on behalf of SARI, Sport Against Racism Ireland, that use sport as a non-formal learning tool to address social issues, particularly racism and discrimination. And the Hijabs and Hat Tricks program that was mentioned earlier was specifically looking at the lifting of the hijab ban back in 2014, and introducing the program to encourage young Muslim women to play football. And actually, that's how I joined the organization in the first place. So I was very interested in sport, primarily playing Gaelic football. So for anyone that doesn't know, Gaelic football is a version of Irish football, and it gives an indication that I come from Ireland. And it was a way of me first coming to the organization and learning about the power and potential of sport to build a sense of community, sense of belonging, but also to address some social issues and really understand as an individual or as a collective how we can address some of these issues that we're facing as young women or girls, but then also advocating and promoting social change. So the Hijabs and Hat Tricks program, I think, looks specifically at the regulation and control of women's bodies. And when it was set up, it was initially almost reactive. And like what I would say is our programs are now very much focused on taking preventative measures and proactive measures. But initially, when this lifting of the hijab ban happened, often at the time what happened was celebrations around the lifting of the ban, but really what it was saying is there's continuing regulation control of women's bodies by lifting and introducing a ban. It's caused us to really look into the different ideologies around women's bodies in sport, and try to address some of the barriers, often hidden barriers, to participation, access to sport. And really, we were just using sport as a medium to try uncover some of the other issues that were going on in the young women's life. Um, uh, and I can also relate to some of what Nicole mentioned around inclusive spaces, because there's a lot of work that goes into trying to create an inclusive space where there's trust built to be able to even talk about some of the issues that have come up for the women that have been impacted by the regulation when it was in place, and then what are the steps that we need to take to be able to provide or try to provide an inclusive welcoming space that celebrates diversity and also acknowledges the complexity of identity and the various different interpretations of modesty that are needed for real inclusion.
Can I take you, Amina, to today? Is SARI still organizing groups of young women?
Yep. So the project Hijabs and Hat Tricks was initially the title, and it's still very much the title we give to it internally. But what emerged very soon after designing the program was that women from various different backgrounds were asking to join the initiative. Because of the inclusive space that it was creating, there wasn't an emphasis on competitive sport. It was very much around creating a social welcoming space. So the women themselves, because it's set up as a co-designed project, the women collectively decided to change the name to Diverse City FC or football club, to allow it to be a space where women, regardless of religion, background, ethnicity, or none of,
That's interesting because I spoke to you before. You were in several REN meetings as well, or colleagues of you were there. I remember that you were also, some of your girls were also coming from deprived areas, where there are, of course, other deprived groups as well, other ethnic or cultural or even religious deprived groups.
Yeah.
Can you say something about how girls' work can tap into that? Potentially, you're from Dublin. We all seen Dublin like 2 weeks ago on the television journal, on the news. Can you say a little bit about this? How's a vehicle for meeting other groups?
Yeah. I mean, initially, how the opening of the project came about was that other people would see our team play and ask to join. But really, in terms of other groups that are marginalized and often excluded from access, how we discovered that is one of the locations that we are based in is the northeast inner city of Dublin, which is one of the most disadvantaged areas in Ireland, and it has the highest percentage of ethnic minority communities. In Ireland, we have various different minority ethnic communities. Roma women, traveller women would be included within that, and there's certain stereotypes that are associated with different ethnic groups. So though there was initially like the conversation around Muslim women's identity, it then became a conversation just about, how the women in the group wanted to be perceived, how they thought they were being perceived by community, like different barriers and challenges that they were facing just in life in general, rather than it being targeted for a particular group. And what was very important for our program as well is around like nothing about us without us. So like we didn't see it as a program that's specifically targeting, or well, we don't see this program as a program that's specifically targeting young Muslim women, but that it is designed for the group, by the group. So as the group changes, the design of the program changes, but often it's supported by SARI staff, almost as youth workers, but we don't really see them as youth workers. We see it as coaches or players of the team, like I myself, came in through the program and wasn't aware of, you know, the extra activities that were integrated into your usual football club. And actually, there's a great paper called "It's More Than a Club," and it's about our football team. So we had a researcher, James Carr from University of Limerick, that talked about how, you know, there was other aspects that were integrated into the training program that made. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, well, send us the link, I would say, so we can share that. I'm taking a look at the clock, and I want to challenge Nicole first, because I know Empower as a great think tank and do tank when it comes to youth work. I want to, at the end of this meeting, I would like to distill, and I think we're almost there, the answer to two questions. It can be done very quickly, I would say. What would you say are the most important needs and or perceived grievances that youth workers should work with to make them more resilient towards extremist recruitment? I think Amina said, indeed, the sense of belonging, perceived grievances about being a woman, being minority. Help me out here. You're a bigger expert than I am. What are the needs and grievances of young women that we should work on to make them resilient in all strands of life, but also keeping them away from the bad influencer ladies?
I think the first thing that comes to mind, which is precisely why we developed Empower, is around the mental health. So Empower Legacy exists to address the worryingly low levels of mental health that the young women and girls are experiencing. So when you're not feeling well about yourself, when you don't have self-confidence, it's easier to fall in the trap of maybe making bad decisions or being with the wrong people or not making good life decisions, or at least not being able to think about the different options that you have in life. So in a way, I think that that's the first point, and what Empower is about, and how through youth work, we see that there can be improvements by creating those spaces where people can have conversations and talk about the things that they're worried about. So that's the first one, I guess. Mental health is also one of the things that the young women and girls worked on the most. So the social action projects were chosen and led by the young women and girls. So we've noticed that out of the 350 social action projects developed throughout the years, that most of them were around environmental issues, mental health, and body image. So these are the three main topics and themes that we've identified as being relevant to the young women and girls that we engaged with through Empower Legacy in England. And I also think that what you were saying before about, Amina, about your work as being identified or defined as youth work or not, I think sometimes we tend to fall in the trap of trying to categorize things rather than thinking about the outcomes. And I think that is youth work, because it's literally helping young people feel that they're heard, that they can make a difference, that they can have a positive impact on their communities, that, you know, they have different opportunities and options. And that's youth work from my perspective, at least, and the way that we see it at UK Youth.
I see some people nodding. And actually, on that note, taking a look at the clock, I think I'm going to conclude this session. We will slightly edit it and then publish it. Carlyle and I will make a short document with pointers to relevant publications, research, and things like that. So, four ladies, please send us some suggestions for the document that we're going to improvise. I want to thank first Dr. Evian, for your presentation and your lovely book and your research. Associate Professor Dr. Nina, thank you very, very much. Also for your extensive presentation, which you kept almost at 15 minutes, more like 20, but it's more or less the same. So great. And then I can just say, Amina and Nicole, thank you for your excellent work, because based on the foundation laid by people who do a lot of research and then coming from a profession of working with youngsters and taking their pain serious and creating a safe space, I think that's the direction where these two worlds can support each other and safeguard young girls who might end up with the wrong friends in the wrong environments, doing all kinds of wrong things. And one of them could be extremism, but could be others as well. I want to thank the four of you. Thank you very much. We can't do an applause. And Caroline is now putting up the QR code for the survey, and I think it's also put in the chat. We would love to hear your feedback. So it will not take you longer than 1 or 2 minutes, I would guess. Please help us and feedback what you learned, what we can improve through the QR code or through the link that we just posted. And having said so, ladies, thank you very much. And audience, thank you very much. And see you next year in another year of the Radicalization Awareness Network. Keep up the good job and have a good holidays and festivities at the end of the year. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Don't rush out. Please complete the survey.
Stephen, are we staying here for the interview? Not hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but actually this was the talk we did with you afterwards was the interview.
All right. Okay. Great.
It was a slip in the program.
Okay, great. Then have a nice evening, everybody. Bye.
All of you have a nice
You
evening.
too.
Please
Thank you very much.
fill out the survey, complete the survey, and take a good rest at the end of this year, and with new energy doing good stuff next year. I'm going to mute myself. I even going to stop the video, but we'll keep up the QR code for those who are so good to give us feedback. Thank you very much.